I learned the truth 3 days after my wife was laid to rest. Not at the cemetery. Not during the eulogies. Not when the minister spoke about devotion and endurance. And not even when my own son stood among nearly 60 mourners and stripped me apart with a few carefully chosen words. The truth waited somewhere quieter. Inside a cream-colored envelope resting on a spotless oak desk in a law office overlooking downtown Madison. An envelope my son was certain belonged to him. And the moment I opened it, everything he believed about money, inheritance, and power began to collapse. The humiliation came first. At Elaine Parker's funeral, my son Julian didn't pull me aside. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't show even the smallest mercy of discretion. He leaned in close enough that the people nearest us couldn't miss a word. "Don't get your hopes up, Dad," he said evenly. "Mom already handled her estate. You were just a phase she moved past." A few conversations nearby went quiet. Someone coughed. Someone else pretended to check their phone. Then he finished what he'd come to say. "You couldn't even afford to save her. So don't act shocked when that finally counts." The sentence hit harder than the sound of dirt striking the coffin. I stood there in a borrowed black suit that still smelled faintly of storage, my hands trembling, while my son, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, the child I'd carried through fevers and nightmares, turned and walked away with his fiancée on his arm. He never once looked back. In his mind, the story had ended right there. 3 days later, I found myself seated across from Margaret Sloan, an estate attorney Elaine had retained quietly, months before her death. The office was immaculate. Too immaculate. The kind of place where grief felt out of place. Margaret didn't offer sympathy. She didn't ask how I was coping. She simply slid an envelope across the desk toward me. "Before anything else," she said, voice measured, "you need to read what's inside." The envelope wasn't addressed to me. It carried Julian Parker's name. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a ledger. Page after page of figures, dates, transfers, a quiet record of decisions made far beyond my sight. And with every page I turned, my understanding of the past 3 years, my marriage, my sacrifices, my son's bitterness, began to splinter. But none of it makes sense without knowing how we arrived there. Julian hadn't always been that man at the graveside. Once we were close. I taught high school civics for nearly 20 years in a public school just outside Madison, earning barely enough to stay afloat. Elaine worked part-time managing the front desk at a chiropractic clinic. We lived in a narrow blue house near Lake Mendota, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, floors that groaned like they had stories to tell. Money was always tight. Love never was. Friday nights meant frozen pizza and card games. Saturdays were bike rides along the water. Sundays were pancakes, burnt coffee, and laughter over nothing at all. Julian was gifted, not in the way proud parents exaggerate, but truly exceptional. Scholarships carried him most of the way through college when he left for Northwestern Illinois University, majoring in finance. The first year, he called every week. The second year, once a month. By the third, only when something mattered to him. That's when Samantha Caldwell appeared. Old money. Private schools. Summer homes that had names instead of addresses. Julian learned quickly which world he wanted to belong to. And it wasn't the one where grocery bags were reused and every dollar was counted twice. When Elaine became ill, everything accelerated. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. Aggressive. Unforgiving. Insurance covered just enough to keep hope alive, and just little enough to break us. I took on tutoring after school, then a night janitorial job at a medical building, then early morning shifts unloading trucks at a warehouse. Julian knew. He also knew he'd just signed papers on a luxury condo with Samantha. Over the phone, his voice calm and distant, he said, "Dad, you can't expect me to risk my future over this." This, he meant, was his mother. Elaine left me 6 months later. Not out of anger. Out of guilt. She said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. She moved in with someone else, a man who promised stability, expertise, answers. I didn't argue. I just kept paying the bills. Which brings me back to the envelope. Back to Margaret Sloan's office. Back to the truth my son never anticipated. Because while Julian believed his mother's estate was something waiting far in the future, the money had already existed. For decades. Hidden. Controlled. Quietly redirected. And the one person who knew every detail was already gone. There's a moment when sacrifice stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a sentence. For me, It happened at 3:42 in the morning on a Tuesday, under buzzing fluorescent lights, with a mop in my hands and a crushed granola bar rattling in my jacket pocket. I had just finished the third floor of a medical office building on the east side of the city. By sunrise, doctors would arrive with coffee in their hands and urgency in their steps. The floors needed to shine. The trash needed to vanish. No one would ever wonder who made that happen. That was fine. I wasn't doing this to be noticed. I was doing it to keep my wife alive. After Elaine's diagnosis, my world narrowed into columns and totals. Deductibles, co-payments, out-of-network charges, prescriptions with names I couldn't pronounce and prices that felt imaginary. Every appointment ended the same way. A careful smile from a billing clerk and a piece of paper slid across the counter like a verdict. I paid what I could. Then I paid what I couldn't. I drained the modest retirement fund I'd built over 20 years in a classroom. I sold my car and replaced it with a dented sedan that rattled whenever it climbed a hill. I accepted credit cards with interest rates that felt predatory but mercifully immediate. When that still wasn't enough, I gave up sleep, tutoring students after school, scrubbing offices after midnight, hauling freight before dawn. 20-hour days stopped feeling reckless and started feeling routine. Elaine watched all of it. At first, she argued with me. Then she apologized for arguing. Eventually, she went quiet. That silence hurt more than the exhaustion. Julian noticed too, just not the way I hoped he would. The call came while I was sitting in my car between shifts, eating soup that had long since gone cold. "Dad," he said, "Samantha's parents saw you downtown." I said nothing. "You were cleaning a building near the hospital district," he continued. "They asked why you were working there." I told him the truth. There was a pause. I could hear restaurant noise on his end, glassware clinking, laughter that didn't include me. "That's not ideal," he said finally. "Julian," I replied, choosing each word carefully, "I'm paying for your mother's treatment." "I know," he said, "but you have to see how this looks. For me. For us." Something settled in me then. Not anger. Understanding. Elaine's health moved in cruel cycles. Weeks where she felt almost normal, laughing at small things, talking about plans we both knew might never happen. Then stretches where the pain stripped everything away and left only fear and fatigue behind. I stayed. Through chemotherapy appointments. Through nights spent upright in plastic hospital chairs. Through hours learning to interpret test results and treatment schedules. And still the bills arrived. Elaine started asking me to slow down. To rest. To stop destroying myself for her. One night, as I helped her into bed, she touched my face and said softly, "You don't look like yourself anymore." "I'm just tired," I told her. She shook her head. "No, you're fading." 6 months later, she asked me to sit with her. Her bag was already packed. She said she couldn't keep watching me unravel. That loving her shouldn't require self-destruction. That someone else had offered support, stability, resources, answers I couldn't provide. I didn't ask who he was. I already knew that any promise that smooth came with terms I couldn't meet. I hugged her. I told her I understood. That night, after she left, I went to work. The house followed soon after. Medical debt doesn't negotiate. It doesn't sympathize. It doesn't care how hard you tried. I moved into a studio apartment with a fold-down bed and a single burner hot plate. The photo albums fit into one cardboard box. The walls were thin. The quiet felt heavy. Julian came once. He stood in the doorway, looked around, and asked, "This isn't permanent, right?" I nodded. Neither of us said what we were really thinking. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that while I was emptying myself out, something else was happening beyond my view. Accounts I'd never seen. Decisions made without me. Money that existed far beyond my reach and my awareness. All I knew was that loving Elaine had a price, and I was paying it in full. The night before her funeral, I sat alone in that apartment, surrounded by overdue notices and silence, and wondered when love had become something measured in dollars. I didn't yet know the answer, but it was already written down, waiting, inside a ledger bearing my son's name. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on Valentine's Day. My phone vibrated against the cheap laminate nightstand, rattling the half-empty glass of water beside it. For a few seconds, I didn't move. Nothing good ever arrives at that hour. I already knew that. "This is St. Catherine's Medical Center," a calm woman's voice said when I answered. "Are you Daniel Parker?" "Yes." "Your wife has taken a turn. You're still listed as her emergency contact." Ex-wife, I almost corrected. Almost. I'm on my way, I said. The drive across Madison felt unreal. Empty streets. Red lights, changing for no one. Snow piled against curbs like forgotten thoughts. I parked wherever I could and ran inside with my coat half-zipped, breath fogging the air. Elaine looked smaller than I remembered. Not thinner. Smaller. Machines hummed softly around her bed. Numbers blinked. The room smelled like antiseptic and something heavier. Fear, maybe. Her eyes opened when I stepped closer. You came, she whispered, surprised. Of course I did, I said, sitting down. I always come. She nodded, then turned her face slightly toward the window. He said you might not. He, the man who promised answers. His name was Dr. Andrew Hale. Successful oncologist. Calm voice. Expensive watch that caught the light when he gestured. The kind of man who spoke in certainty when everyone else spoke in margins. He entered Elaine's life during one of my overnight shifts, offering reassurance where I could only offer endurance. He arrived later that morning, crisp suit beneath a white coat, reviewing charts like they were investment portfolios. The cancer has spread, he said. We have options, but we need to be realistic. I'd learned to hate that word. Define realistic, I said. He folded his hands. Aggressive treatment is possible, but it's costly, and the success rate is modest. How modest? I asked. He hesitated, just long enough to sound compassionate. 30%. Elaine squeezed my hand weakly. Quality of life matters too, he continued. At some point, it's kinder to stop fighting. Kinder to whom? I wondered. Elaine waited until he left before speaking. He doesn't think I should do the trial, she said quietly. What do you think? I asked. She looked at me, clear-eyed despite the medication. I want to live. Then we fight, I said. We'll figure it out. She swallowed. Daniel, how? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. 2 days later, Dr. Hale pulled me aside in the hallway. You should prepare yourself, he said gently. And her. For what? For letting go. Something about his tone unsettled me. Not cruelty. Calculation. That night, I went back to my apartment and stared at my bank balance until the numbers blurred. $63. 3 maxed-out cards. A body that felt 20 years older than it should. I slept in my clothes. By morning, I had an answer anyway. I called lenders who still recognized my name. Signed papers I didn't fully understand. Agreed to numbers that scared me. When Elaine asked how I'd managed it, I told her not to worry. She believed me. That was my mistake. The treatment began, and something unexpected happened. Elaine improved. Not dramatically, not miraculously, but enough that nurses noticed. Enough that the rotating oncologist smiled instead of frowned. Dr. Hale did not share their enthusiasm. Plateaus happen, he said. False hope can be dangerous. But Elaine was awake more. Talking. Laughing sometimes. Asking about Julian. Julian didn't visit. He sent flowers. One afternoon, good enough that Elaine sat up and ate real food. She looked at me and said, I think Andrew saved me. I didn't reply, because by then, I was starting to suspect something else. Late one night, I went looking for billing records. Not summaries. Details. Accounts. Transfers. Authorizations. And for the first time, I saw numbers that didn't add up. Charges marked paid in full without my name attached. Invoices cleared before I'd taken out loans. Funds moving through accounts I didn't recognize. When I asked Elaine about it, she frowned. Andrew handles that, she said. He said the trust was depleted years ago, but he has ways. What trust? I asked. She blinked. My father's. Her father had died decades earlier. I knew that. What I didn't know was that he'd left anything behind. Elaine had never spoken about money. Not once. When I asked again later, she grew quiet. He told me it wasn't important, she said. That focusing on it would stress me out. That night, I sat in my car outside the hospital, engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. Something was wrong. Not emotionally. Not medically. Structurally. But I didn't yet understand how deep it went. That understanding came later. 3 days after Elaine was buried. In a law office overlooking downtown Madison. Inside a cream-colored envelope. With my son's name written neatly on the front. And a ledger that explained everything. Julian didn't come to the hospital the day Elaine began to improve. He didn't come the following day either. Instead, flowers arrived. White lilies arranged with surgical precision. The card read, thinking of you both. No handwriting. Just his name printed neatly at the bottom, like it had been added by a machine. Elaine noticed. He's busy, she said, forcing a smile. Samantha has events. Her family is hosting something. I nodded. I didn't argue, because I already understood what she wasn't ready to say aloud. Julian wasn't absent because he was busy. He was absent because hospitals made him uneasy. When he finally did visit, it was brief and carefully contained. He walked in wearing a tailored coat that looked out of place against the pale walls and antiseptic air. He stopped at the foot of Elaine's bed, hands clasped, smiling the way people do when they don't intend to stay long. "You look better," he said. "That's really good, Mom." Elaine reached for his hand. He hesitated, just long enough for her to notice, before taking it. "How long can you stay?" she asked. Julian glanced at his watch. "I have a dinner later." Of course he did. Later, he pulled me aside in the hallway. "I spoke with Andrew," he said. "I already knew." He explained everything. Julian continued. "The treatments, the costs, the odds, and—" I asked. Julian let out a slow breath. The kind people take before delivering news they believe is reasonable. "Dad, you can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" I asked. "Sacrificing your entire life," he said. "Your health, your future. You're destroying yourself for a 30% chance." "She's your mother," I said. He looked away. "That doesn't change the math." The word stayed with me. Math. As if love were a problem you solved once and moved on from. Julian sounded exactly like Andrew. Same phrasing, same calm delivery, same emphasis on inevitability. Andrew had taught him how to see this. And Julian had accepted the lesson. A week later, Julian called late at night. "I need to be upfront with you," he said. "Samantha's parents are asking questions." "About what?" I asked. "About you," he said. "About your situation. Your work." There it was. "I'm doing what I need to do," I said. "I know," Julian replied quickly. "But they don't understand it. And honestly, neither do I." That hurt more than anything else he'd said. Elaine continued to improve. Small wins. Longer conversations. Fewer pain medications. Nurses began using words like promising and encouraging. Andrew, however, visited less. And when he did, something had shifted. "Responses like this can be temporary," he said. "We shouldn't misinterpret progress." After he left, Elaine looked at me. "He doesn't seem happy," she said. "No," I replied. "He doesn't." Julian came again a few days later, this time alone. He sat beside Elaine's bed and held her hand longer than before. When she drifted off to sleep, he turned to me. "We need to talk," he said quietly. We stepped into the hallway. "You should step back," he said. I waited. "This is becoming uncomfortable," Julian continued. "For whom?" I asked. "For everyone," he said. "Andrew, Samantha's family, even Mom." Something inside my chest gave way. "She asked for me," I said evenly. I didn't insert myself. Julian sighed. "But you're still acting like her husband." "I am her husband," I said. He shook his head. "You're separated. You haven't lived together in months. Andrew is managing her care, her finances, her future, and you're fine with that?" I asked. Julian hesitated, then nodded. "He makes sense," he said. "He's stable. He knows what he's doing, and he's not destroying himself." There it was. The next words sounded rehearsed. "You should consider letting go." I stared at him. "Mom deserves peace," he said. "Not guilt. Not watching you work yourself into the ground. Andrew says the kindest thing is to stop fighting what's coming." And suddenly, I understood. Julian wasn't choosing logic over emotion. He was choosing comfort over responsibility. "Let me ask you something," I said quietly. "If I disappear, does this all become easier?" Julian didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he finally said. The honesty stunned me. "For you?" I asked. "For everyone," he said again. That night, I sat beside Elaine's bed while she slept, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Julian had chosen his side. Andrew had chosen his. And I believed I was alone. I wasn't. Because while they were choosing comfort, the truth was already moving. Quietly, deliberately, toward the moment when comfort would stop protecting anyone at all. The first sign didn't come from a confession. It came from paperwork, billing, not the neat summaries meant to calm patients and families, but the deeper records buried behind forgotten usernames and half-remembered passwords Elaine had created years ago and never expected to revisit. I didn't start digging because I suspected betrayal. I started because the numbers didn't line up. 2 invoices appeared in the system on the same morning. Same procedure, same date, same department. One showed pending. The other was stamped paid in full. The paid invoice didn't list my name. It didn't list any of the lenders I'd taken loans from. It didn't list insurance. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, waiting for an explanation to materialize. It never did. I mentioned it to Elaine the next morning, keeping my voice casual. "Do you know who's covering some of these charges?" I asked. She frowned slightly. "Andrew said he'd handle it." "With what money?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said old accounts." "What accounts?" Her gaze drifted away. "My father's trust," she said quietly. Her father had been gone for more than 3 decades. A reserved man. Meticulous. Private to the point of secrecy. But Elaine had never mentioned a trust. Not once in all our years together. That afternoon, while she slept, I followed a quiet instinct and walked down 2 floors to the billing department. The woman behind the desk was efficient and polite, and visibly confused. "I don't see your name connected to these payments," she said, scrolling through records. "They're being authorized through a private account." "Whose account?" I asked. She paused. "Dr. Hale's authorization is attached." The room felt colder after that. That night, I sat in my car outside the hospital, engine off, watching snow drift through the glow of streetlights. This wasn't kindness. It wasn't generosity. It was leverage. 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Parker," a man said, measured but urgent. "This is Lawrence Whitaker. I'm calling about Elaine's financial matters." I stayed silent. "I'm an estate attorney," he continued. "I oversee interests connected to her family trust. We need to speak in person." "Why?" I asked. A pause. "Because certain decisions were made without proper safeguards," he said. "And because timing is critical." We met at a cafe near the hospital. Neutral territory, full of quiet conversations and clinking cups. Lawrence was older, silver-haired, dressed plainly for someone who clearly managed extraordinary sums. He opened a folder without ceremony. "Elaine's father created a trust decades ago," he said. "Real estate holdings. Long-term investments. Dividend-producing assets." "How much?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "Approximately $90 million. The noise of the cafe faded. I laughed once, short and disbelieving. "That can't be right," I said. "Elaine didn't know she had that kind of money." "That's true," he replied. "She never had direct access." He explained slowly. For years, Elaine had received modest distributions, amounts small enough to blend into ordinary income. Never enough to raise questions. 18 months ago, everything changed. The structure shifted. Authority transferred. Power of attorney was signed. Given to whom? I asked, already knowing. Lawrence didn't hesitate. "Dr. Andrew Hale." The folder thickened. Statements. Transfers. Authorizations. Large sums. Carefully timed. Elaine was told the trust had been exhausted, Lawrence said. Medical costs. Market downturns. She believed there was nothing left. "And the money?" I asked. Lawrence closed the folder gently. "Was never gone." My hands trembled as I scanned the pages. Properties refinanced. Investments redirected. Funds moved into newly created entities. All technically legal. All profoundly wrong. "And the insurance?" I asked. Lawrence's expression tightened. "A life insurance policy was taken out 6 months ago." "How much?" $50 million. My throat closed. "Beneficiary. Originally," he said carefully, "your son." My pulse spiked. And now, Dr. Hale. Everything aligned in an instant. The resistance to aggressive treatment. The constant talk of inevitability. The rehearsed concern for peace. This wasn't medical caution. It was financial strategy. "Does Elaine know?" I asked. "No," Lawrence said. "But she's begun asking questions. Enough that I initiated a review." I leaned back, chest tight. "What do we do?" "We tell her," he said. "Immediately." "And Dr. Hale?" Lawrence's eyes hardened. "We act before he does." That night, I sat beside Elaine's bed and held her hand while she slept. For months, I'd believed I was destroying myself to keep her alive. The truth was worse. I had been kept poor deliberately, driven to exhaustion, while the money to save her had existed all along. I didn't know how Elaine would respond. I didn't know how Julian would respond. But I understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about comfort. It was about truth. And once spoken, it was going to shatter everything. Elaine woke just after midnight. Not from pain. Not from fear. Just awake. Her eyes found me immediately, sharp despite the hour, as if she already knew I was holding something back. "You're thinking too loudly," she murmured. I took her hand before I spoke. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. She didn't ask what it was. She only nodded. I told her carefully, piece by piece, without urgency, without embellishment. I started with the invoices, identical charges, same dates, different outcomes. Bills marked unpaid alongside others stamped settled without explanation. She frowned, trying to follow. Then I told her about the trust. Her father, the accounts she'd never controlled. The money she'd been told no longer existed. Her fingers tightened around mine. "That can't be right," she said quietly. "Andrew showed me paperwork." "I know," I said. "It wasn't honest." I explained about the review, about Lawrence, about how the money had never gone anywhere. When I said the amount out loud, her breath caught. 90 million, she whispered. "I thought I had nothing." "You thought you had nothing," I said. "I thought I was burning myself down to save you." Tears slid silently toward her ears. "I left you because of that," she said. "Because I thought loving me was destroying you." "I know," I said again. I waited before telling her the rest. Then I said it. "There's also an insurance policy." Her eyes opened. "I don't understand." I told her the amount, the timeline, the change in beneficiary. She didn't cry this time. She went still, the way people do when truth rearranges everything at once. "He wanted me to stop treatment," she said slowly. "Yes." "He kept talking about peace," she continued. "About rest." "Yes." She stared at the ceiling. "He was waiting for me to die." At 6:30 a.m., she asked for a pen. At 7 o'clock, she asked for her phone. At 7:15, she told me to call Lawrence. By 8 o'clock, the room felt different. Not gentler. Focused. Andrew arrived just before noon, confidence intact, smile polished like always. "How's my favorite patient today?" he asked lightly. Elaine didn't smile back. "Sit," she said. He hesitated, barely, then pulled a chair closer. "We need to discuss my finances," she said. His expression tightened. "That can wait. Stress isn't good for." "No," she said calmly. "It can't." She reached into the bedside drawer and slid a folder onto the tray. "Copies. Statements. Records." Andrew scanned the top page, then looked up. "I'm not sure where you obtained these," he said. "From someone who isn't lying to me," Elaine replied. The air in the room changed. "You told me my trust was gone," she said. "You told me I was broke." "I was protecting you," Andrew said smoothly. "Financial stress. You took control," she said. "You moved my money." "I managed it," he replied. "Responsibly." "You took out a life insurance policy," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "And named yourself." Andrew stood. "I think the medication is affecting your judgment," he said. "Sit," Elaine said. He didn't. "Leave," she said then. "Now." "You don't get to dismiss me," he snapped. "I'm your physician." Elaine turned to me. "Call administration." I already was. When Andrew returned, he wasn't alone. 2 hospital administrators stood behind him. Elaine spoke clearly, deliberately. She revoked his medical authority, his financial authority, his access to her care. Immediately, Andrew didn't argue. He looked at me once, not with anger, but with calculation, and walked out. That was the last time I saw him. The room fell quiet. Elaine stared at the ceiling for a long time. "I thought money would protect me," she said finally. "I thought choosing security meant choosing correctly." She turned toward me. I was wrong. I squeezed her hand. "You're still here." "For now," she said. "Because you refused to walk away." That afternoon, she made calls. New doctors, new lawyers, new documents. Everything was rewritten. Power of attorney, beneficiaries, the will. She didn't tell me the specifics. She didn't need to. As evening settled, she spoke again. "Julian needs to know." My chest tightened. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "Just not yet." She met my eyes, clearer than they'd been in months. "He believes money defines worth," she said. "So did I." She paused. "He's about to learn the difference." That night, I sat beside her bed once more. But the weight had shifted. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was awake, alert, and moving steadily toward the moment when no one, not Julian, not Andrew, would be able to hide from it. Elaine didn't tell Julian the truth immediately. She waited, not because she was afraid, not because she was uncertain, because timing matters when truth has consequences. She asked him to come to the hospital 2 days later. No urgency, no explanations. just a calm request to talk about family matters. Julian agreed without hesitation. He always did when the word family carried financial undertones. He arrived that afternoon with Samantha beside him, both of them polished and composed, irritation tucked neatly behind courtesy. They looked like people who had rearranged important plans to be somewhere they didn't want to be. Elaine noticed. "So did I?" "You both look well," Elaine said as they entered. Julian bent to kiss her cheek. "You look stronger." "I am," she said simply. "Sit." Julian took the chair closest to the bed. Samantha hovered, then settled near the window. "I asked you here," Elaine said, "because there are things I should have said a long time ago." Julian nodded, already bracing for what he assumed would be a financial conversation. Elaine didn't begin with the doctor. She didn't begin with betrayal. She began with us. "With your father," she said, her voice steady, "and the life he carried when no one was watching." Julian glanced at me, then back at her. "For years," Elaine continued, "he held this family together quietly, without complaints, without recognition, even when it cost him everything he had." "Mom," Julian started. "I'm not finished," she said gently. She told him about the jobs, the loans, the nights spent sleeping upright in plastic chairs. She told him about the house, the studio apartment, the exhaustion she had mistaken for weakness instead of devotion. Julian's jaw tightened. "I didn't know it was that bad," he said. "You knew enough," Elaine replied evenly. Then she told him about the trust. Julian straightened. "My grandfather's estate?" he asked. "Yes," Elaine said. "The one you assumed would eventually be yours." Samantha leaned forward, suddenly attentive. Elaine explained what had existed all along. The accounts, the assets, the money she had never been allowed to manage or even fully see. Julian stared at her. "Then why didn't you use it?" he asked. "Because I was told it no longer existed," Elaine said. "By someone you believed." Julian went still. She told him about Andrew, the power of attorney, the transfers, the life insurance policy. When she mentioned the beneficiary change, Samantha inhaled sharply. "That doesn't make sense," Julian said, shaking his head. "It does," Elaine replied. "If you stop assuming his goal was my survival." Silence settled over the room. Then Julian spoke again. "You told me Dad was holding you back," he said. "That he was being unrealistic." "I did," Elaine said. "Because that's what I was told." Julian looked at me then. Not defensively, not dismissively, but truly, for the first time in years. Elaine reached into the bedside drawer and removed an envelope, thicker than the rest. "This," she said, "is why I asked you here." Julian's eyes fixed on it immediately. "My will," Elaine said. Samantha straightened. Elaine didn't hand it over. She opened it herself. "I've changed everything," she said calmly. Julian swallowed. "Changed how?" Elaine met his gaze without hesitation. "I corrected what was unbalanced." She explained plainly what Julian would receive, what he would not, and why. No anger, no accusations, just truth. Julian's face drained of color. "You're punishing me," he said softly. "No," Elaine replied. "I'm teaching you." Samantha stood abruptly. "Elaine, this isn't fair. You're making emotional decisions." Elaine looked at her once. "I've never been clearer." Julian's voice cracked. "You're giving it to him," he said, looking at me. "After everything?" Elaine nodded. "Because he gave without conditions," she said. "And you measured love like a transaction." Julian stood. "So that's it?" he asked. "I lose everything because I chose stability?" "You lose nothing you earned," Elaine said. "You only lose what you assumed belonged to you." The room fell quiet. Samantha reached for Julian's arm. He didn't take it. After they left, Elaine sank back against the pillows, exhausted but resolute. "That was harder than telling you," she said quietly. I took her hand. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "even if he doesn't understand yet." She nodded slowly. "He will," she said, "or he won't. Either way, the truth no longer belongs to me alone." Elaine passed away 6 days later. Peacefully, without fear. She was holding my hand when it happened. Julian arrived too late. He stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the stillness where his mother had been. For the first time, there was no calculation in his expression, only loss. The funeral followed. And then, the envelope, the ledger, and the lesson that would outlive all of us. The will was read 3 days after the funeral, not in a room meant to impress. A narrow conference space. One window. A long table scarred by years of use. Outside, Snowmelt pooled along the edges of a parking lot that hadn't yet decided whether winter was finished. Julian arrived early. He sat with his coat still on, hands folded, back rigid, not relaxed enough for confidence, not restless enough for impatience. He didn't look at the door. He didn't check his phone. He stared at the tabletop as if he were bracing for something he had already accepted was coming. Samantha wasn't with him. I arrived a few minutes later. He nodded once, but didn't speak. Neither did I. The attorney entered and began without ceremony. Elaine's wishes were read the way she had lived, clearly, without ornament. Modest gifts to friends who had stayed. Donations to causes she believed in but never talked about. Gratitude where gratitude was due. Then Julian's name. She left him enough to begin again. Not enough to coast. Enough to learn what starting over actually requires. There was a letter attached. Handwritten. Julian unfolded it slowly. He read the first lines without reaction. Then his jaw tightened, not clenched, just held too still. He didn't blink for a long moment. When his shoulders finally sagged, it wasn't collapse. It was surrender. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket, as if it might bruise if mishandled. Then the attorney turned to me. Elaine had left me what remained. The trust, the assets, the responsibility, not framed as a reward, as a correction. Her words explained it simply. You gave without asking. This restores balance. Nothing more. Nothing needed. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the weight of being trusted with something that could easily be misused. Outside, Julian stopped me near the edge of the lot. Dad, I turned. I didn't understand, he said. Not defensively, not apologetically, just plainly. Not until the end. I nodded once. I know. He hesitated, then said, I thought love came after success. After stability. I thought you earned it once everything else was secure. I didn't answer right away. And now? I asked. And now I see I had it first, he said, and traded it for approval. We stood there in the cold, the space between us neither closed nor hostile, just unfinished. I don't expect anything, he added. I'm not offering anything, I said. Not yet. He accepted that without argument. That mattered. I didn't buy a new house. I didn't leave town. I paid off debts, mine, and some that weren't. Quietly. Then I built what Elaine would have recognized immediately. Not a monument. A place. A foundation that paid for one thing insurance never could. Time. Time near hospitals. Time off work. Time to sit with someone who shouldn't have been alone. I kept teaching. I was less afraid now. Julian came by months later. No suit. No agenda. No practiced language. I want to help, he said. I waited. Not because I'm owed anything, he added. Because I don't want to be the kind of man who only shows up when there's something to gain. I handed him a stack of forms. Start here, I said. He did. He didn't ask what it would lead to. On the anniversary of Elaine's death, I went to the lake alone. I didn't linger on memory. I watched the water move, unchanged, indifferent, present. I thought about how much effort we spend trying to secure ourselves against loss, and how little time we spend learning how to live honestly with it. Elaine had learned too late. Julian had learned just in time. The ledger sits in my desk drawer. I don't open it often. I don't need to. Its lesson isn't in the numbers. It's in what remains when comfort fails, when illusions fall away, and when love is finally measured by what you give without guarantees. That was Elaine's inheritance. And now, it's mine to pass on.